Hi guys, I've got something different than usual for today's video. If you watched the last prompt squad, you know I've been feeling a bit uninspired lately, so I decided to set myself a challenge to try and restart my creative drive. So my plan was to challenge myself to finally learn how to paint digitally. It's something I've really wanted to feel more comfortable with for a long time, but because I wasn't comfortable with it, I just kept putting it off and putting off loads of practice, so really it was just a self-fulfilling prophecy that I wasn't really improving much. So I came up with this 100 animal challenge. It's heavily inspired by the 100 head challenge if you've seen that online. Basically, the idea is to paint 10 animals every day for 10 days. So by the end of it, you've painted 100 animals. Because I was practicing digital art, I did end up exploring lots of different techniques and styles every day, and it really helped me to identify what I did and didn't like. So really, in other words, it did help me find my style in this medium. I created a Pinterest board with all the animal reference images, so if you'd like to give this challenge a go, the link's going to be on screen and in the description too. Now, I wasn't sure how to make this video as I didn't want it to be really overwhelming, but at the same time, there's 100 paintings involved. So I'm going to show the process behind one of the paintings on each day, and then talk a little bit about the thought process behind them and how each one ended up affecting the next day. So on day one, I pretty much wanted to play around with the brushes on Photoshop and just see how the textures of the brushes would look when illustrating things like fur or scales. I was trying to keep it all experimental and unique to each of the reference images and animals, and because of that I think this day showed a lot of random styles and different ways of depicting the animals, which I found was really good as a jumping off point for the week. It was really inspiring to take each animal on its own as this unique piece, and it really gave me a lot of ideas of what I wanted to try and test on the following days. So by day 2, I wanted to play with the digital line art side, but I really wasn't sure whether I'd prefer rough pencil outlines or sharp pens. I do think they've both got their own merits, so I did revisit this idea later on in the week, but through this day I realised that I was more drawn to animals that had the added texture of the pencil brushes, and I think it may be because they appeared more traditional to me and that's what I've always preferred personally, but I also think it did give them a little bit more life and movement than the clean pen lines did. On day 3, I went the complete opposite of the day before and decided to omit all line art. I wanted to simplify the animals down to their simplest shapes, almost to give this idea that they could be cut out of paper like a collage. I think keeping them flat, bar a few brush strokes, made it a lot easier to focus on the general shape and composition of the characters. And from this day onward, I really did try to consider this throughout the rest of the challenges and animals. The only thing I wasn't as big a fan of was the really sharp outline that the pen tool achieved. I just didn't feel like it was very natural and didn't really suit an animal, so I did look for ways to tackle that by day 4. So on day 4, I tried to take what I did learn the day before and maybe inject a bit more character and personality into the animal's overall design. I was trying to keep it loose again and see how different styles changed the expression of the characters, and when it did work, it really did teach me a lot. I think that the eyes really are the biggest choice when it comes to painting animals in this way and creating them into characters. So many of them don't have whites in their eye like a human does, but the second you give them that, the style of the eye and the shape of it really humanises their appearance. So it was really interesting to play with this idea and see how much I could change their perception by adding whites to their eyes. At least, yeah, I felt like that was the big difference between the characters and something to consider going forward. Now on day 5, I replaced the pen tool I'd been using for just painting the bulk of the animal shape with a textured brush instead. This gave the flat colours a bit more texture just from the get-go, and I think it brought a bit more life into them too. Instead of using more detailed brushes, I stayed with the pencil and tried to introduce some pencil shading and textures to the creatures that way. And I think this brought back that traditional feel into the pieces again and made them a bit more expressive. I think it's a nice after product of pencil shading, kind of like pointillism in a way where you can see all the details that the artist has done really clearly. On day 6, I went back to the line art and just stuck with the pen brush. The main reason for this is I really wanted to get more practice in with it, but at the same time, drawing with a pen is how I begin every traditional piece of art that I do. So I really wanted to see if that skill and mindset could be translated over to digital art. In some ways, I think that did work, especially with the owl. I think you can see a lot of the flow and expressiveness that you can get with an ink sketch that way. So I think going forward, this could be a good way of trying out lots of different ideas digitally in the future. During day 7, I flipped back to the pen tool again, as I was really looking to keep up the practice with that tool. It's a little bit more fiddly to use, or at least I think it is. And at the same time, I wanted to test that texture theory that I was kind of coming up with at the time. To me, it seemed like the textures were making the art feel more traditional and alive, so I really wanted to see if I stuck to really smooth gradients, would those animals that looked almost like vector art still give you that feeling of being alive and being interesting? Through the practice of that day, and especially when it came to the giraffe, it kind of made me realise that using pastels and these smoother ways could be a nice way of adding a bit of shape and depth almost to these animals without having to rely on really thick textures. On day 8, I took that vector art style of day 7 another step further and kind of kept the gradients a lot smoother, and then instead of adding the texture with the brush, I decided to use overlays on the layers. The results were really varied for this style, and I think it's really a style that suits the animal that you're choosing to depict. So like the gorilla and the rhino, because they both have rough texture, I think the overlay worked a lot better for them and added lots of detail in a way that it didn't really work on other animals. I think it's important that the overlay doesn't detract from the strong shapes and the composition that you're trying to make. So yeah, I think it's a good technique so long as it's not going to overwhelm the important information, which to me is the shape and the composition of the creature. Okay, so we're on day 9, and on this day I was really focusing on just using the oil paint brushes, which were completely new to me. They're really interesting because what they do is they pick up the colours that you've already laid down on your canvas and blend with them as you paint, really just like traditional paint would. I think I definitely need a lot more practice with this brush, but it does give you some interesting outlooks on how to paint digitally. I do think that this is a style I could see myself taking at a much later point, but as I'm still at the beginning stages of learning how to paint digitally, I think I might leave this to the side for the moment and try and stick with the things that I am just beginning to learn and enjoy and push those first. And that kind of nicely leads me into day 10, because by day 10 I knew I wanted to take all of these favourite techniques and styles that I'd been learning through the previous 9 days and bring them all together for these final animals. I haven't really mentioned it yet, I don't think, but I was giving myself 20 minutes on a timer to paint each of these animals. I think if I gave myself any more time than that, I don't think I would have painted 10 every day. So for the final day, I decided to treat myself and give myself 30 minutes to do each of the animals, so that I could just enjoy myself more and maybe play with it and experiment just a little bit more than I had done the days before. And I think purely doing that really shows in the paintings and gives you an idea that like if you spend an extra 5 minutes on a painting, this is how different it can look. I really liked when the mixture of textures and brush strokes all kind of came together and added some detail to the more flat shapes and colours of the animals. So I really focused on that when I was approaching these final ones. I also wanted to bring out the character behind the animals a lot, so I really played again with their eyes and their expressions in these pieces. I was really happy with how these turned out, and I think when I compared this collection with day 1, I can really see how much more confident I've become digitally. And it also really inspires me to paint more digitally, which I definitely needed to continue working this way in the future. And yeah, it just was really good practice. So I'd highly recommend, if you want to practice painting animals or practicing your digital painting, to give this challenge a go. To be honest, even if you're just feeling a little bit uninspired at the moment and you have no drive to paint like I did at the beginning, maybe try something similar. Maybe choose a subject that you're most interested in painting and try and draw 100 of them in 10 days like this. By the end of it, you can have all of this work to look at and you're going to see the progress that you've made. And I think that that accomplishment and that feeling is really going to help you get back into that artistic groove, and it will give you some new skills to go forward with too. I really hope you enjoyed seeing the art behind this challenge and hearing my thoughts on it. It's still a few weeks till the next prompt squad is out, so if you fancy taking part in that, please go watch the video before this one and give that prompt a go. I love chatting to you guys as always, and I hope to hear from you down in the comments and hear your thoughts, and yeah, if you enjoyed the challenge and whether you'd consider doing it in the future. And that's it for today. I'll see you again soon.